Are you ready to winterize your bass boat? Let's get it done. Stick around. Hey folks, Keith here at Chicken Thigh Fishing. Welcome aboard. Welcome back to the Getting It Done video series. Today we're going to go through the annual maintenance / winterization process for a Tracker Protein 175 TXW. And now a lot of the processes that we're going to employ here today and the parts we're going to use and the methods and stuff are applicable to really any bass boat. But the boat that we're going to be working on is my boat. I've had a lot of inquiries about what I do for winterization. Obviously, I live in the Northeast, and so winterization is a must. If you live in a climate where you need to do that, you know, there's a whole bunch of videos out there, and there's a bunch of good ones on YouTube for the individual parts of the projects that you need to do to properly winterize your boat and do your annual maintenance that you have to do. But I've had several inquiries and questions and comments about the entire process. So I figured what I would do is take the entire annual maintenance / winterization process and put it in one place in one video from beginning to end. So it's all in one place for you if that's something you're looking for. So we're going to change the oil. We're going to change the gear oil. We're going to do spark plugs. We're going to change the fuel filters. We're going to take a look at the whole process and get this boat ready for winter, which, by the way, is already here for me up here in Massachusetts. So if this is something you're interested in, this may be the video for you. Let's get going. All right, we are ready to go, folks. We are going to get this thing done. Annual maintenance and winterizing. So we're out here at the boat. If you can't tell, there's already snow on the ground. I don't know if you can see it, so I'm a little behind the 8 ball, but we haven't dipped into sub-zero temperatures yet, so I'm not too worried about it. But I wanted to do this video all at once, which is why I waited, and now I have all the stuff I need to complete all the individual projects, and we're going to get going, and we are going to start with changing the engine oil. So the first thing we're going to do to change the engine oil, and what we're going to need to do for a lot of the individual projects we're going to do today, is remove the engine cover, the cowling that goes over the top of your engine. That's a simple matter of this lever here. All you have to do is pull this out, and you'll feel it unclip, and then you just lift it off. So now that we got the engine cover off, we're going to go ahead and drain the old oil so we can put fresh oil in. I am going to conduct this video as if you've never done this before, and as if you've never changed oil before or spark plugs or anything like that. In case you don't have that knowledge, I'm going to present it to you that way. So the first thing you have to do to change your oil is to drain the old oil. So the drain plug on your Mercury Outboard, you will find on the left side right here, and that is your drain plug. But what I'm going to do first, in order to make this a little easier, make gravity work for us a little better, is I'm going to go ahead and tilt the engine in a manner so that it, helps along the draining of the oil. We'll get it up a little bit, and I'm going to use the trim switch here on the outside port side of the motor. Alright, so I lifted the engine up, and now I'm going to turn the steering wheel so that the engine turns this way a little bit, and that will just give it a little extra more directional force for the oil to drain out. Okay, so now that the engine is up a little and tilted to the port side, the oil's going to have a little bit better time coming out of it. So I have my oil pan here, and clearly you're going to need an oil pan to catch your oil. And we're going to use an 18mm socket to remove the oil drain plug. Okay. All right, so I've just cracked it. I'm going to do it the rest of the way by hand because I'm going to make sure to catch the oil as it comes out. So I'm unthreading the drain plug by hand, and there is your oil. And you can clearly see how black that oil is. I put a lot of hours on my engine. And so she is definitely in need of an annual oil change. So here is your oil plug, and on your oil plug you will note that it has a seal. That yellow component there is a drain plug seal. And so we're just going to remove that because we're going to replace it. And that's one of those things that you don't necessarily have to replace this every time you change your oil. But for a couple of bucks, why not have the insurance of a new seal? So there is the oil drain plug seal, and we're going to get rid of that. So we're going to grab our new seal, and again, you can get these anywhere online, eBay, Amazon, boating equipment stores, and short money, good insurance to always replace your seals whenever you change your oil. So we're going to clean off that drain plug. We're just going to put the new drain plug seal on there. Thread that down. Now we have a new seal on our drain plug. And once that oil is done draining to your satisfaction, we're going to go ahead and replace the drain plug and the new seal. And we'll clean up any residual oil here. And now that we have the old oil out, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to straighten out the engine because we don't need it tilted or trimmed up so high anymore and make it easier to work on. So I'm just going to put that back a little. Okay, so the next part of our oil change is going to be the oil filter, and that is located right here on the port side of the motor. And you'll see I have it marked from the last time I changed it. Always a good idea to mark it, so anytime you are looking, you know when you changed it last in case you forget. I changed this last October. I'm a couple months behind the 8-ball here, but as long as you do it annually, you're pretty good. Now, if you've never removed an oil filter before, there are several methods to it. Sometimes you can simply do it by hand. Other times, like this component's in the way here, so you can't get a really good grip on it. There's all manner of oil filter wrenches. You have kinds that fit over the end and you put them on a ratchet, just like a socket, and you can turn it that way. This seems to work fine for me. You can even use a set of big channel locks or whatever. And basically all you're going to do is loosen it, crack it free, just like the drain plug, and then go ahead and twist it out by hand the rest of the way. But first, I'm going to take a rag because there's going to be some oil that comes out of here. And I want to keep that from getting in this whole area to the best of my ability. So we're going to shove a rag right down in there. Now you can't change oil without getting oil, to some extent all over the place. You're going to get drips and drops in that. No big deal. You just like to clean it up to the best of your ability afterwards. So now that I got a rag to catch the lion's share of the oil, I'm going to go ahead and loosen it up. And you'll see that that was fairly easy to simply loosen. So then we're going to unscrew it. And so there will be oil in there. So we'll dump that oil in the oil pan. And we're going to go ahead and discard the old oil filter. Clean that up a little bit there. And now we'll take our new oil filter and we'll replace the old one. It's got a little cap on it. Take that off. Now, good practice when you're putting on an oil filter is just take a little bit of the old oil on your finger and just kind of coat that seal with it. And then we're going to screw the new filter on. I'm going to hand tighten that. And then I'm going to go just a little bit beyond hand tightening. You do not have to go crazy, and you don't want to go crazy cranking down on an oil filter. So I'm just going to take that and give that a little tweak. And that's good. And so now our oil filter is replaced, and I'm going to go ahead and mark it. And that way I know when it was last changed. Now, with regard to your engine oil, there is a couple of other components you're going to want to know about. And first off is the oil dipstick, which is located right here next to the oil filter. And you can see that right there. All you have to do is lift up on that, and you can pull that out, and that's your oil dipstick that you would use to check the oil level. That goes in there and it simply clamps down. And the other thing you're going to want to know is your oil fill cap, which is right here, this yellow cap. And we're going to put new oil in here, so obviously we're going to have to remove the fill cap. And you should be able to just twist that off. And if that's super tight or anything, just take a set of pliers and crack it free. No big deal. And there is your oil fill cap. So we'll give that fill cap a little wipe down. We'll check the integrity of the O-ring on it. That's something you're very rarely going to have to replace, but if you notice that was dry rotted or anything like that, you would definitely want to replace that O-ring. But it's not going to be very often where that's going to be necessary. So in order to fill the engine with new oil, all you're going to need is your oil. And I'm using Quicksilver 25W40 synthetic motor oil here. And you can get this anywhere, auto parts store, Cabela's, you know, whatever. Now this 60 horse engine calls for 3.17 quarts, and you don't want to forget about that 0.17. And 0.17 quarts equates to around about 5.5 ounces. So we're going to do 3 full quarts and about 5.5 ounces of a 4th quart. Fill her up. All you need for that is your oil and a funnel. So we'll fill the oil with the 3 full quarts. off of the 0.17 quarts of the 4th quart. I'm going to take my old bottle here that is a partial quart of oil, since I had to use a partial quart last time. So I'm just going to pour a little bit at a time. And so after that funnel is done draining out, we now have 3.17 quarts of 25W40 synthetic motor oil, new oil in our engine. So I'm going to go ahead and replace the oil fill cap. And we'll hand tighten that. And there you go. And so the only other thing I'll mention, if you're not familiar with changing oil, obviously now you're going to have used oil. So as you can see, I have my pan of used oil here. And what I'm going to do is I have an oil jug in my shed. I'm going to pour that in the oil jug. And if you're somebody who hasn't done your own oil changes before, all you got to do is bring that to a local auto parts store and they will dispose of it for you, so you don't have to worry about it. Or if you have a town dump, a lot of town dumps have oil disposal barrels. So take it out of the pan, put it in a jug. You can get an oil jug anywhere at any auto parts store, and you are good to go. We took the old oil out, we filled it with new oil, and we put a new oil filter on, and we dated it. We checked the functionality of the oil dipstick, and it's fine. And we replaced the oil fill cap. One project down, on to the next. Okay, next up is our engine thermostat. And your engine thermostat isn't something that you necessarily have to replace every year, but it's always worth checking it. Number one, because it has a gasket, and you always want to check the condition of the gasket. Number two, junk gets in your thermostat. And depending on, where you fish and how you fish, are you fishing in a foot of water like me, kicking up mud and all kinds of debris? Are you fishing in brackish water or even salt water? You want to check that thermostat to make sure everything's good and the gasket is good. So your thermostat is located right here. There's a little housing, and that housing is secured with two 10mm bolts. And so we will remove those two bolts. And check the condition of the bolts, and a little bit of corrosion here on this bolt. Alright, so we'll take that second bolt out, and the housing will come with it, or sometimes you have to pop it off. And there is the housing. You can see a little bit of gunk in there, and you can see the gasket there. And we will go ahead and remove the gasket, and that should just peel right off. If not, you can just use a razor blade to get that off there. And you can see the wear and tear on that gasket. And this component inside here is your actual thermostat, and you should be able to just wiggle it out of there. And that is your thermostat, and you have a rubber ring type gasket, not quite an O-ring, but it's more like a rubber gasket. It goes around the tip, and you can see that this thermostat is ready to be replaced. It has some corrosion on it, and overall looks kind of gross. And here you can see that we do have a little bit of gunk and debris in there, and anything like that can and will ultimately compromise the performance of your engine thermostat, and you need an engine thermostat. So I have a new engine thermostat kit here that I got, I ordered on Amazon, I believe. Either Amazon or eBay, I can't remember. And in that kit will come a brand new thermostat. And when you get your new thermostat, it may come with that rubber gasket piece here already attached, or it may come separate and you just have to slide that on there. So we have our new thermostat, but before we put the new thermostat in, I'm going to go ahead and clean out that thermostat port. So we'll take our new thermostat and put that right in the thermostat housing port. And we're going to take our new gasket that came with the kit. You may get you can buy a thermostat without the gasket or with the gasket if you can find it that way, or you can buy them separate, but you got to have the gasket. I'm going to clean up that housing a little bit, get any debris or foreign objects out of there. So after I've cleaned up the thermostat housing cover, we're going to go ahead and replace the gasket, put the housing cover back on. And you just hold that in place. And go ahead and replace that cover, and you just have to get the holes for the bolts to line up. I'm going to hold that in position and replace that bolt. And now that I have that first bolt semi screwed in, I'm going to take that other one that has the corrosion on it, and I'm just going to take a wire brush to that and clean that up a little bit. You know, no sense in leaving it like that. Now we'll secure that housing in place. Okay, we have now replaced our old thermostat with a new engine thermostat and gasket, and we cleaned the housing and we cleaned the port, so we're good to go with the thermostat. Next up, we are going to change our fuel filters. Your Mercury 4-stroke EFI outboard motor has two fuel filters, a low pressure one and a high pressure one. We're going to start with the low pressure canister fuel filter, and you're going to find that on the starboard side of your engine, and that is in this housing right here. Inside this housing is the actual filter, and you can see the fuel line comes up here and the fuel goes through there. So basically we're going to take out this housing and we're going to replace the filter inside it. Now, you can replace the whole housing. You can buy a kit that includes the whole housing and all the components, but you very rarely would need to actually have to do that. You want to do that, God bless you. You know, I'll never break anybody's chops for doing overkill. You want new parts, put new parts. You can't go wrong getting new parts. But you shouldn't need, unless the housing is damaged or cracked or, you know, otherwise compromised in some way. All you would actually need to do is replace the filter inside the canister. However, you can buy the whole unit as one. So in order to remove the fuel filter canister here, you will see that there's this metal fork here, and this rubber piece at the top slides in on that fork, and we're going to just shimmy that out of there, and you'll see there's the fork I was talking about, and the fork goes in the grooves here, and that's what secures that. So taking that out of there just makes it a whole lot easier to work with. You don't have to, you can leave it in and do it with it there, but it just makes it easier to work with. So now once you have that separated here, we're going to want to remove this canister. However, be advised, there is going to be fuel in there. So you're going to want to get rags or some container handy in order to catch and not have that fuel go all over the place. Now you should be able to just twist this off. It screws in. However, if it's too tight for you to unscrew with your hand, there is kind of a plastic nut on the bottom that you could put a wrench or a socket on to break that free. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to be able to remove that just with your hand. So I'm unscrewing the canister here, and I can see that it's full of fuel. And so there is your canister, and you can see that it's full of fuel. So if you just, whip that off there, you're going to get that fuel all over the place. So that's why you want to be a little careful with that and have something handy so you can dispose of it properly. So you're going to inspect your canister, look for signs of corrosion or damage. And, most of the time you're not going to find any, but, who knows? So you want to take a look at it, make sure it's looking good. There is an O-ring in the top of that, and you just want to make sure that's in good condition. And of course, if you get the whole kit, the whole housing kit, you'll get a new canister and a new O-ring. So here is the fuel filter itself. And so all you do is pop that off. And you'll get it again, you'll get a little bit of residual fuel in there. And this is your old filter. And that's not a terrible filter. I've seen a lot worse than that, but she's ready to go. So I've got my new fuel filter here. I got a 2-pack, so I'll have one for next year. And we're going to go ahead and replace that old fuel filter. And so here is the old, and here is the new. So in order to install that fuel filter, all you're going to do is pop it up in here, and it's just going to pop in with the resistance of that O-ring there. And there you have it. So now if you were going to replace the whole fuel filter housing here, all you would have to do is remove these 2 fuel lines here, which is a matter of cutting these wire ties here, these zip ties rather, and taking them off the spouts there, and you can replace this whole piece. And again, it's as simple as this. It's not a very complicated job, but you would have to disconnect these fuel lines here in order to put the new housing in. But I've looked at this housing, and there are no indications that there are any problems with it. No dry rot, no corrosion, nothing appears broken. So I'm just going to take that new filter there, and we're going to put the canister over it, and we are going to be good to go. So we will put the canister on and screw that in place. We're going to hand tighten that, and then we're going to go ahead and put it back on that metal fork here on this rubber grommet, which holds it securely in place. And that's just a matter of popping it in there. And so now our low pressure fuel filter, the new one is in the canister. The housing is back attached to the stabilizer fork here, and we are good to go. That is done. Okay, so next up is the high pressure or inline fuel filter. And that fuel filter is on the port side of your engine. And it is right down in here. Right down in here, you see this neoprene or rubber type sleeve. The fuel filter, the inline fuel filter, is underneath that sleeve. So it's kind of in tight quarters, and if you have big hands, it might pose you a little bit of difficulty, but in general it's easy to change. So I'm going to walk you through how to change that fuel filter. When you change this for the first time, it may have a zip tie around it. All you got to do is clip that zip tie off and retrieve it so it's not flying around in there, and then replace it when you're done. But I never replaced it last time. I didn't put a zip tie on here, so there's not one here, but you may have one on yours. So what you're going to do is you're going to peel back this sleeve a little bit, revealing that little red clip, and you're going to put pressure on that clip, and that's going to release it. But before we do, we're going to put a rag down there because there is going to be residual fuel there. So I'm going to take a shop rag and kind of stuff that down underneath there to absorb the residual fuel. And you know, it's almost impossible to do this without getting some fuel, but you just want to keep it to a minimum, and you want to get it soaked up and cleaned up and not leave it there. So I'm going to go ahead and tuck that underneath, and I'm just going to bend this up here a little bit and peel back that sleeve and put some pressure on that red clip, and I'm going to be able to pop that fuel line off of the end of the fuel filter. And if you have pickle fingers like me and you just can't get the dexterity to depress that red clip there, you can use a little screwdriver or other implement. You just want to be real careful. You do not want to break it. Okay, and you can see here that I have fuel coming out of the end of that fuel line, and it's kind of puddled up there, but I'm catching the lion's share of it in that shop rag, and we'll clean it up good when we're done. And so what you're going to want to do is slide that sleeve off, and once you have that sleeve off, that will give you access to the fuel line and the clip on the other end of the fuel filter, which is that white plastic component there. So we've removed that front fuel line with the red clip, and now that we remove the sleeve, we're going to go ahead and remove that back fuel line. Okay, and so there you have your old inline fuel filter. And I really should be wearing gloves when I do this, so you know, there's that. And you can take a screwdriver and kind of, you know, push your shop rag down in there to get it into the crevices and nooks and crannies to get all the fuel up. And you know, so you can take a few minutes and make sure you get all that fuel up. So I'm tucking that shop rag right down underneath there because I can see little puddles of fuel. So I'm just sticking that right in there with the screwdriver here. Be careful, being careful not to, you know, mar any of the hoses or anything. And you can see the one fuel line on this side with the red clip and the other fuel line on that side with the red clip, just so you can get a better view of what you're dealing with there. I shove that way down in there. I use some needle nose pliers to go down and get it, and you know, you can see I sopped up a whole bunch of fuel. Quite a bit of fuel can come out of there. Okay, so now that I've got like 99% of that residual fuel sopped up with the shop rags, I'm going to go ahead and replace the old filter with the new filter. And this is what that looks like here. And this is directional. It's only supposed to go in one way. And you will see, if you can see, that there is an arrow on the housing. And it's very subdued, but there is an arrow there, and that arrow points toward the back of the boat. So you're going to want to put it in with the arrow facing that way. So before I go to put the new filter in, what we're going to do is we're going to attach the back end of the filter to the fuel line on this side, and then the fuel line on this side. But before I do, I'm going to take this sleeve and I'm going to push it over this end of the fuel filter and bring it past this ridge here. And the reason I'm going to do that beforehand is because it's really difficult to do it. I find it difficult anyway, once you have that first fuel line attached, because then you have to fit this sleeve over this wider end. So I'm going to put it on the skinny end, and that helps me get it over the wider end a lot easier than it is if you do that while the first fuel line is attached. So I'm just going to work that on there, and I'm going to enlist the aid of some pliers here. It just makes it that much easier. And okay, so now you can see that I've got it past that big lip, and so now I'm going to pull it further past it so I'm able to expose that back end, this end that goes here. And now remember, that arrow's got to be facing this way. So now I'm going to take this end and clip it into the fuel line with that red clip, and it's just a matter of pushing it in, and that will click into place, and you will feel it, and it's audible, and you can feel it and see it and hear it click into place. See if you can hear that when I click it in. There we go. So now we have that fuel line attached on that end, and so we're going to take this end and click it into that red clip, and there we have that clicked into place. So now I'm just going to shimmy that sleeve up so it's, you know, in proper position to do its job and protect that fuel filter. And you will see that we now have that back in place, and I'm going to go ahead and take a zip tie and tie it around it just to make sure it stays in place. But you know, I don't really think that's going anywhere because it is pretty snug on there. So there you have the fuel filter replaced, clipped in the red clip on this side of this fuel line, clipped in the red clip on this side on this fuel line, and with the protective sleeve in place. And you just changed your inline high pressure fuel filter. Congratulations. So I just took the old inline fuel filter and I beat it up with a hammer a little bit, and so you can see the filter element inside there and how dirty that was and in need of being replaced, as opposed to what a new filter looks like, you know. So that's what that looks like inside there. Now, one note is, you know, a lot of maintenance is called for every season or every 100 hours of engine use. And I'm not sure that the inline high pressure fuel filter is called for at 100 hours. That might be called for changing it at 300 hours. I haven't really checked the manual on that one, but that's one of those things. Why not? You know, why not change it and put a new filter in there? Again, these things are short money. They don't cost $100 a piece. And while you're doing your annual maintenance, if you get into the habit of changing things, even when maybe it's not necessary, you know, like if that inline fuel filter is, say, every 300 hours of use on your engine, and you change it every 100 hours or every season instead, I mean, it can only do you good, right? So there's that. Next up, spark plugs. We're going to change our spark plugs. We have a 4-cylinder engine. That means there are 4 cylinders on it. For each cylinder there is a spark plug, so you will need 4 spark plugs to put new spark plugs in your engine. Now again, spark plugs fall into that category where, you know, do you have to change them every season? Maybe not. Depends on your use. It depends on the condition of them. But I change mine every season without fail. So here on your engine, you are going to see where your spark plugs are at. And you can see the boot on the spark plug there. It's kind of a, I don't know, it's actually kind of a brownish purple color. And so you have a spark plug there. You have a second one in there. You have a third one there. And there's your fourth one down there. And now, to be sure, you can change those spark plugs just like they are right here. But I'll tell you what, it can be a little tough with all this stuff in the way. When I change the spark plugs, I remove these ignition components here, and it makes it 50 times easier to change those spark plugs with these out of the way. And to get these components out of the way here is a very simple matter of unscrewing some bolts and disconnecting a couple of anchor points here. So you will see that each ignition coil component here is responsible for 2 of the spark plugs. This one is for numbers 2 and 3, and this one is for numbers 1 and 4. And so these are marked, but that may not always be the case when you're working on an engine. And so what you want to know, if you've never done spark plugs before, is spark plugs fire in a specific order. And the order they may fire in isn't necessarily 1, 2, 3, 4. They may, when your engine is running, they may fire in an order of 1, 3, 4, 2. That might be the firing order of your engine. The point being is that if they are not in the correct order, in other words, if you take one spark plug and wire out of one spark plug hole, and then when you put it back together, you put that spark plug in a different hole, your engine is not going to fire in the order that it was intended to by the manufacturer, and it's either not going to run correctly or it's not going to run. So one thing that you want to be sure of when you are replacing spark plugs is that you have the same spark plug wire going to the same spark plug as you did when you removed it. You cannot mix them up. It makes it a far sight easier when they mark them for you, and you can even mark them yourself or do anything you need to do to make sure that you put that back. One of the easiest ways to make sure you put the right spark plug in the right spark plug hole is by doing one at a time. If you do one at a time, then you know you're going to put it back into the correct place. If you take all 4 out, you may open yourself up to possibly putting a wrong spark plug wire going to a spark plug in the wrong hole and messing up your engine firing order. So that being said, we're going to go ahead and remove these parts so we have real easy, smooth access to those spark plugs in there. And we can just pop them out and pop the new ones in. So in order to remove this unit here, we're just going to basically push it aside so we can get, free access in there. We're going to remove the bolts, and this bolt not only holds the component in, but it also holds this retainer, this cable retainer here that holds these cables in place. So we're going to remove that bolt and this cable retainer, and then down here we're going to go ahead and remove this bolt, and then on each of them we're going to go ahead and unclip these 2 wires, and we just take those off of there, and we're going to make sure we put them back on the correct ones, and then we're going to take these and we're going to move them aside. So these bolts here are 8mm, so you're going to get an 8mm socket, and I'm going to go ahead and remove this top one here. I'm going to remove that bolt, and now I can move this cable retainer here and just kind of get that out of my way. And I'm going to remove the second bolt. And we have this here. So now I'm going to take this clip harness here, and I'm going to very carefully pop that off. So all I did was take a screwdriver and kind of lift up on the top one and push down on the bottom one. You got to be very careful. You don't want to break those, and you can break them easy. They're plastic, especially when it's cold outside. And so now we have that here. We have this here, and you can see that we're able to move that component aside, and that gives us much easier access to those 2 spark plugs up there. So now we're going to do the same thing with this bottom component. We're going to remove the 2 bolts that secure it to the engine, and we're going to remove this clip, and we're going to push that one out of the way. So I'm going to remove that clip, and pop that out. And so these are kind of taped and secured in place, so you're going to know which one goes to which. I mean, it would take you an awful lot of effort to put these in the wrong components. So this one sits up higher, this one sits down lower. You know, another thing I would say is it's a good idea to take a photo beforehand, especially if it's the first time you've done it, before you start dismantling everything. And that way, if you run into any confusion or anything, when you're putting it back together, you have a photo to refer to what it looked like before you took it apart. So, you know, that's always a good idea. Okay, so there's the fourth bolt. And now you can see that I'm able to move both of these components aside. And I'm going to remember that 2 and 3 is the top unit, and 1 and 4 is the lower unit. And I'm just going to push those aside. And that's going to give me very clear access to 1, 2, 3, all 4 of my spark plugs. Now, I am not going to do these spark plugs one at a time. I'm going to take them all out. And the reason that I'm going to do that is because we're going to fog the engine for corrosion protection while we have these spark plugs out. So I'm going to get to that in a little bit, but just so you know, that's the reason I'm not going to replace these spark plugs one at a time, because when I fog the engine, I'm going to need the spark plugs out. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a little bit. So now, if you are only replacing the spark plugs and not worrying about fogging the engine, then what you can do is remove the boot from each spark plug one at a time, replace the spark plug, and then put the boot back on. And that way you know the correct wire is on the correct spark plug, and you won't have a problem at all. However, if you're going to do what I do, or if you're going to take all the spark plugs out at the same time, it may be a good idea to mark them. And so that's what I'm going to do. So you'll see that the top unit here is marked 2 and 3. So this is cylinder number 2, this is cylinder number 3. And cylinder number 2 goes to this spark plug here. Cylinder number 3 goes to this spark plug here. So the middle 2 are 2 and 3. So now that I know that, I know that cylinder number 2 is fired by this spark plug wire, which, as you can see, you trace it, it goes to this spark plug. Cylinder number 3 goes to this spark plug wire, which goes down to this spark plug. And so that's the key point that you want to remember when you put them back together. So 2 and 3 are actually 2 and 3 in order. So if you order them, you know, down 1 to 4 from the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 and 3 are in fact 2 and 3 in the order. So that's going to be easy for me to remember. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these components completely. And so all I'm going to do that is to remove the spark plug boot from the spark plug itself, and that's simply a matter of pulling it off. So there is spark plug number 2, 2, 2. Now I'm going to pull out spark plug number 3. I'm going to pull the boot off the spark plug, and I can remove this whole component and get it out of my way. But I need to make damn sure I know that this is 2, this is 2, and this is 2. Because it's very, very important to get that right when you put it back together. So 2, 2, 3, 3, and 2 and 3 is the top unit. So now this one is 1 and 4, so it goes to spark plug number 1 and spark plug number 4. So the spark plug numbers are correct, but it's the firing order that may not be 1, 2, 3, 4. Matter of fact, it almost always is not going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to take the spark plug wire off of 1. And we're going to reach down here to number 4, and 4 is the toughest one to reach because it's kind of down a little. So now I have both of these components removed. I have 2 and 3 and 1 and 4, and I'm going to put those aside. I'm going to lay them down how they go, with 2 and 3 on top and 1 and 4 on the bottom. I got to do whatever I can to make sure I have a method, or to be able to put them back in the correct place. So now with the spark plug boots removed, you can see the spark plugs themselves. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now we're just going to simply go ahead and remove those. So now if you've never changed spark plugs before, it is a super simple job, but there's a couple things you're going to want to know. Number one, you need a spark plug socket. And a spark plug socket is a little different than a regular socket in that it has a rubber grommet type boot inside that secures onto the spark plug, so that once you put it on the spark plug, loosen it, you're able to pull it out. And in an engine like this, it's not that big of a deal because you can reach here and grab it. But a lot of engines, especially car engines, those spark plugs are down in a tube. And so there would be no physical way for you to put your hand down in there. So you use a spark plug socket because the tip of the spark plug seats into this rubber piece inside here. And so when you're done, let's say you're down a tube this long getting at them with an extension, you can then pull it out. So if you didn't know that, that's why you need a spark plug socket. And most socket kits, most socket and ratchet kits come with the 2 or 3 most popular sizes of spark plug sockets, but if not, you can get those anywhere as well. Any auto parts store will have spark plug sockets. So I'm simply going to go ahead and remove those spark plugs by putting the spark plug on and kind of finning it onto the boot inside. And once you feel that you've got it on there, it's simply a matter of unscrewing them. And you can see when I pulled that out, the socket grabbed it. And you'll see that when I turn it upside down, that spark plug doesn't come out because that spark plug socket grabbed it. So you can see here that I clearly need to replace these spark plugs. Now, you could clean that up quite a bit, but for the cost of spark plugs, there is no sense in not putting new spark plugs in. So there is spark plug number 1. We'll remove the remaining 3. Here's number 2. Number 3. And now with number 4 is going to be a little different because 1, 2, and 3 you had a straight shot at. 1, 2, 3, and all you needed was a straight ratchet extension to be able to get in there on that. But you will see on number 4 that because number 4 is down here, I can't get a straight socket on there. Now I could remove the extension. I could remove that extension and see if it fits this way and see if I have enough clearance. And it looks like I have the clearance to be able to take that out without an extension in place. However, you may run into an issue where as you're pulling it out, something like this fuel filter that we just changed blocks your progress of taking it out. In which case, you would want to use a knuckle that is able to give you an angle on your ratchet extension, and that just makes life a whole heck of a lot easier. So what I'll do is I will take my knuckle here and I will put it on my extension, and I will put the extension on the ratchet, and I'll put the spark plug socket on that knuckle, and now I'm able to go in at a funky angle and take that out without fear of having to, not enough clearance to be able to remove that. So I'm going to take that and stick that down in there, get it seated on the spark plug, And you can see here that knuckle allows me the dexterity to move it in all kinds of different angles to be able to get down there and remove that. So as I operate the ratchet, I can keep that angle and remove that spark plug, and that makes it a lot easier. And again, most ratchet sets are going to come with a couple of knuckles like that for those hard to reach things you need to take out. So now I've loosened that almost all the way. I can reach in with my hand and pull out spark plug number 4. So now I'm going to take my new spark plugs, and you can use spark plugs of any brand. You just have to make sure you get the right part number, because clearly different brands are going to have different part numbers. So what I'm using are NGKs, and the number for this spark plug for this motor on NGK is right here. And that number will be different if you get a Champion spark plug, or any different type of spark plug. So the next thing you're going to want to know, if you've never changed spark plugs before, is when you take off the protective packaging and take them out of the box, you're going to see, and here's a juxtaposition of the old and the new, so you can see how they get fouled up by the fuel and by firing all the time. And what you're going to need to know is that you need to gap these spark plugs. And what gapping means is you will see that L-shaped element on top. I'll put that there. And the gap between the element and here has to be a certain gap in order for the right size spark and the right fuel ignition formula for each cylinder to be achieved. And so what you're going to need in order to gap your spark plugs is, shocker, a spark plug gapping tool. So you can get these anywhere. If you've never seen one before, this is what a spark plug gapping tool looks like. It's got measurements on there, and what it has is a ramped side. I'm not sure if you can see that. And so what you do is you put the spark plug on that lipped edge, and you bring it around until it reaches the measurement that you desire. And what that does, as you move it around that ramp, for lack of a better word, on the side of it, the lip, the edge, it lifts this piece up to that gap that's noted there by numbers. Not sure if that's focused in or not. And so what you need to do is find out what the manufacturer's gap is for that spark plug. And most oftentimes that'll be right on your engine. And you'll see here, right on the back of the engine here, it tells me spark plug gap is 0.040, and another way of saying that is 40 thousandths. So it's 40 thousandths of an inch. And it also here it recommends Champion, and it gives you the number. So if you were to get Champion plugs, this would be Romeo Alpha 8 Hotel Charlie. That's the Champion plug you would get. But I just happen to get NGK, and so that's what we're working with. So that being said, I have to ensure that the gaps on these spark plugs are at 40 thousandths. So I'm going to find 0.040 on my gauge here, on my spark plug gapping gauge, and I am going to bring this around until I get to 0.040, and that is how much we're going to open that gap. So I'm almost there, and you just bend it a little bit and it bends that up, and now I am at a gap of 40 thousandths. So again, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this, but you'll see the tip of it here, and I'm right on 40 thousandths. So I go ahead and remove that tool, and now my gap on my spark plug is at the manufacturer's recommendation of 40 thousandths. Now there are different types of spark plugs that you do not have to gap, but generally it'll say that on the package. And if you're worried about whether or not you need to gap the particular spark plugs, you know, because there's certain type of iridium spark plugs that you don't need to gap, they have a different type of element on the end here. So if you're not familiar with it, all you have to do is ask your auto parts person and they will tell you whether or not that spark plug needs to be gapped. So now that I have all 4 spark plugs gapped, I am ready to put them back in, reconnect the spark plug wire boots, and put the ignition coils, those components, back on there and put it all back together. However, before we do that, we are going to fog the engine. Now, fogging the engine, what that means is adding fogging oil like this into your engine, and what that does is that protects the interior components of your engine, the pistons and the piston rings and whatnot that are inside those cylinders, and it protects them from corrosion during periods of time when your engine isn't in use. And you know, there's some people that'll tell you you don't need to fog your engine if it's only going to be up for a month or 2, and there's other people who will tell you if you're going to put it up for any length of time, you should fog your engine to protect from corrosion. So I would imagine where you live and the type of weather you deal with has a lot to do with that. But again, it's one of those things where it's easy enough to do. Why not do it for your own peace of mind and to protect from any type of corrosion on the interior parts of your engine? Because when something goes wrong with the interior of your engine, I'm here to tell you that ain't cheap. So I'm always going to fog my engine in order to protect those inside parts when it is sitting and not in use. So we're going to put this stable fogging oil inside each cylinder. So the hole for each spark plug leads directly into one cylinder of the engine. So basically all we're going to do is spray some of this into each hole. It's going to go inside that cylinder to the engine. We're not going to spray a whole ton of it in there. We're going to spray it for like maybe 3 or 4 seconds inside there. So I'm going to stick the nozzle right inside the cylinder, and I'm going to depress it for just 2 or 3 seconds. There's one. Try to get in here on number 3 down here. And then I'm going to try to bend this down to get down in that 4th cylinder way down there. Okay, so I had to manipulate that 4th one, you know, to get that down in there. And so I sprayed fogging oil into each cylinder for 2 or 3 seconds. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the engine to distribute that oil around in those cylinders. And that's simply a matter of turning the key to the on position and cranking the engine for a couple of seconds. Now you don't want to do that for more than just 2 or 3 seconds max. Do that a couple of times and that will turn the motor, the crankshaft. You know, you can also do it manually by manually turning the flywheel on your motor, but you know, if you don't know how to do that, that can be a little difficult, or that can be physically difficult to actually turn it, depending on the condition of your motor. So the easiest way to do it is to just go ahead and turn your key and crank it a little bit. Now of course your engine is not going to start because the spark plugs aren't in, so there's no spark to ignite the fuel mixture to create the combustion to run the engine. So it's not going to start on you, so you don't have to worry about that. That being said, you don't want to do it for more than a couple of seconds because that could in turn damage your engine. So we're going to go ahead and take care of that now. So I got my key in and we're just going to crank it for a couple of seconds. Okay. And by doing that, again, what we did was we turned the engine to distribute that fogging oil. So now we have fogged our engine. You've provided, you know, corrosion protection for the time that it's going to be winterized and stored over the course of the winter. And so now we are ready to replace the spark plugs, the wires, and the ignition components back to where they need to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my 4 gapped spark plugs, gapped to 40 thousandths. I'm going to put those back in one at a time. And so now that I've hand tightened those spark plugs, I'm going to go ahead and tighten them down with my ratchet. So now we're going to replace the ignition component for cylinders 2 and 3. I'm going to attach the boot to the spark plug. So we have 2 here. And you just want to push that on until you feel it engage. And you can feel it engage with the end of the spark plug. Alright, so now we have 2 and 3, the wires attached to the coil. We're going to go ahead and replace the 2 bolts and put this back in position. Now remember, on this top one, we're going to go through this cable retaining bracket. Then I'll take my 8mm socket. Okay. So cylinders 2 and 3 are completed. Now we're going to do cylinders 1 and 4. And this wire is going to go up through here and onto spark plug number 1. And this wire is going to go down below for spark plug number 4. Okay, so those are attached. Now we're going to reattach these wire harnesses. That just clips right on there. And we're going to clip this one back into place. And that's on there. And so there you have it. We just did our spark plugs. That's all we're going to do for today. I'm going to see you tomorrow. We're going to finish this because it's getting dark and it's getting cold and my feet are freezing. So I'll see you in a minute.